There is a particular kind of silence that fills a room when your husband of 19 years sits across from you and says the name of your best friend, not the way you would expect him to, not with guilt or shame, but soft, careful, like he was afraid of breaking something that was already his. That was the moment I knew, before he finished the sentence. Before he said her name a second time, I already knew. My name is Renee Whitfield. I am 53 years old. I am a certified public accountant with 22 years of experience, a woman who has built her entire professional life on the belief that numbers do not lie. People lie. Budgets get manipulated, invoices get falsified, cash flow statements get dressed up to look prettier than they are. But the numbers underneath all of that, the raw, unadorned figures, they always tell the truth. Eventually, I should have applied that logic to my marriage a long time ago. It was a Thursday evening in late October. The kind of October evening that Charleston does particularly well, the air finally cool enough to breathe after 6 months of humidity that makes you feel like you are living inside someone's mouth. I had made dinner. Nothing complicated. Roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, a salad with the good olive oil because it was Thursday and I had decided years ago that Thursdays deserved the good olive oil. Patrick was supposed to be home by 6:30. He walked in at 7:42, which was not unusual enough to alarm me. He was an architect. Projects ran long. Clients called. I had learned not to watch the clock. What I had not learned, what 19 years had apparently not taught me, was how to read the specific way a man walks when he is carrying something he has been carrying for a very long time and has finally decided to put down. He came into the kitchen. He did not kiss me hello, which he usually did. Even on bad days, even on the days when we were barely speaking, there was always that automatic press of lips to cheek, the marital equivalent of a software update routine, necessary, mostly unnoticed until it stops. That night, it stopped. He sat down at the kitchen table. I was standing at the counter finishing the salad. I noticed his hands first. Patrick has always had steady hands. It is one of the things that makes him a good architect. That precision, that control. That night, his hands were resting flat on the table and they were trembling slightly, the way a table trembles when a truck passes outside. Just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I was paying attention. I set down the salad tongs. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. I did not ask what was wrong. Something told me that if I waited, he would get there himself. And after 19 years, I had learned that Patrick Whitfield, when forced to sit in silence with something, would eventually speak just to fill the quiet. He spoke. "Renee," he said. His voice was different, quieter, careful in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." I folded my hands on the table. I looked at him. I waited. And then he said her name. Cassandra. Not the way you say the name of someone you are mentioning in passing. Not the way you say the name of a mutual friend in the context of a dinner party or a weekend plan. He said it the way you say the name of someone who belongs to you. Soft at the edges. Owned. And I felt something shift in my chest. A tectonic thing, slow and enormous and impossible to stop once it has started moving. He kept talking. I registered the words the way you register background noise when you are trying to concentrate on something else. 4 years. He said 4 years. He said it had not been planned, that it had just happened, that he knew there was no excuse, that he was sorry, that he loved me, that he was also, and here his voice dropped even further, also in love with her. And then he said the thing that rearranged the furniture of my entire interior life. "She is pregnant," he said. 5 months. The kitchen was very quiet. I became aware of very specific details in that moment. The sound of the oven fan. The way the overhead light caught the edge of my wine glass and threw a small crescent of light across the table. The fact that my hands, still folded in front of me, were completely still. Not because I was calm. Because my body had gone somewhere else entirely and left my hands behind, neatly folded, waiting for instructions. I picked up my pen. I keep a pen on the kitchen table because I am a CPA, and we keep pens everywhere, the same way other people keep chapstick or loose change. I pulled a notepad toward me. Patrick watched me do this with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something between confusion and terror. I looked up at him. "How much?" I said. He blinked. "What?" "How much money," I said, "have you spent on her?" It was not a question. It came out flat, like a line item on a balance sheet. Patrick opened his mouth, closed it. He had clearly prepared for tears, for screaming, for the shattering of plates or the hurling of accusations or some version of the dramatic confrontation that movies have trained us all to expect when a marriage detonates. He had not prepared for a woman with a notepad and a pen asking him to quantify his betrayal. He started. I'm not sure of the exact. That is fine, I said. I will find it myself. I stood up. I went to the oven and turned it off. I covered the roasted chicken with foil because 19 years of marriage had apparently not cured me of the instinct to not waste food, even in the middle of a catastrophe. Then I picked up my pen and my notepad and I walked upstairs to my office and I closed the door behind me. I sat at my desk for a long time without turning on the computer. And then I thought about 2 weeks earlier. Cassandra had come over on a Tuesday evening, the way she had been coming over for the past 11 years, easy and unannounced, kicking off her shoes at the door and helping herself to whatever was in the refrigerator. We had sat at that same kitchen table and shared a bottle of wine, and she had looked at me across the rim of her glass with those familiar brown eyes and said, with a smile that I now understood was the most expensive smile anyone had ever given me, "You are so lucky, Renee. Patrick is one of the good ones." She was sitting in my kitchen, drinking my wine, 5 months pregnant with my husband's child, and she told me I was lucky. I picked up my pen. I opened my notepad to the first page. At the top, I wrote one word. Audit. I met Patrick Whitfield at a firm holiday party in December of 2005. He spilled eggnog on my blazer and spent the next 20 minutes apologizing in 3 different ways verbally, with a stack of cocktail napkins, and then by finding me a club soda from behind the bar with the focused determination of a man defusing a bomb. By the end of the night, I had his number in my phone and a dry blazer and the distinct impression that here was a person who, when he made a mistake, did not stop until he had fixed it. I would like to go back and have a word with the woman at that party. I was 34. I had been living in Charleston for 2 years, having moved from Columbia after I made partner at a small accounting firm on King Street. The job was good. The city was good. My apartment on Rutledge Avenue had tall ceilings and original hardwood floors, and a clawfoot bathtub that took 45 minutes to fill, but was absolutely worth it. My life was, by any measurable standard, going well. Patrick was 36. He was a structural architect at a firm downtown, the kind of work that required equal parts creativity and precision, which, looking back, should have told me something about his capacity for compartmentalization. He was tall, a little rumpled, the kind of handsome that sneaks up on you. He laughed easily and listened carefully and held the elevator door open for people even when it was clearly going to cost him time. Everybody thought he was a good man. I thought he was a good man. I married him in the spring of 2007 in a small ceremony on the grounds of a plantation house outside Charleston, 48 guests, my mother's lemon pound cake on every table, and Cassandra Briggs standing 3 feet to my left in a pale blue dress, holding my bouquet while I said my vows. Cassandra and I had been friends since the first week of freshman year at the University of South Carolina. We had lived 2 doors apart in the dormitory, shared a macroeconomics textbook for an entire semester, and survived a road trip to Savannah in a car with no air conditioning in July, which is the kind of experience that either ends a friendship immediately or cements it forever. For us, it was the latter. 26 years. More than half my life. She was the person I called when I got the partner offer. She was the person who sat with me in the waiting room of the fertility clinic on 2 separate occasions, once with bad coffee and once with a crossword puzzle, both times with the particular steadiness of someone who understood that what you needed was not advice but simply another human body in the room. Patrick and I decided to try for children in 2009, the same year we bought our house on Trad Street, a 3-bedroom Charleston single, with a piazza on the 2nd floor and a garden that the previous owners had maintained beautifully and that I have maintained adequately, which is the honest version. My parents gave us $40,000 toward the down payment. My father wrote the check at their kitchen table in Columbia and said, "This is an investment in our grandchildren." I thought of that sentence often in the years that followed. The grandchildren did not come. We tried for 4 years before we saw a specialist. Then we tried with help, the kind of help that involves early morning appointments and fluorescent lighting, and the particular indignity of medical intervention in what is supposed to be the most private area of a person's life. We did 2 rounds of IVF. The first, in 2013, failed. The second, in 2014, also failed. But differently, there was a brief, devastating window of hope before it failed, which was somehow worse than the clean failure of the first. After the second round, I sat in the parking lot of the clinic for 30 minutes before I could drive home. Not because I was crying, because I was doing the math, calculating the odds. Trying to determine at what point continuing to try became statistically unreasonable. This is what I do when I am in pain. I reach for numbers because numbers have edges and grief does not. There was a third option, a modified protocol, the doctor said. Better odds. The cost would be $18,500 out of pocket because our insurance, like most insurance, in matters that actually affect people's lives, was spectacularly unhelpful. I went home and told Patrick. He sat at the kitchen table, that same kitchen table, and he looked at me with an expression I understood to be genuine sorrow, and he said, "Ren, I want this as much as you do, but we just cannot swing $18,000 right now. Maybe next year." Next year became the year after. The year after became 2016. I was 45. The window was not closed, technically, but it had narrowed to a sliver and we both knew it, and somewhere in the exhaustion of hoping and failing and recalibrating, we stopped talking about it. We built our life around the shape of what we did not have. We traveled. We renovated the kitchen. We got a dog named Walter who lived to be 14 and was, objectively, the best member of our household. We were fine. That is the word I would have used if anyone had asked. Fine. Which is a word that means so many different things depending on how you say it. Cassandra was there for all of it. The appointments, the failures, the pivoting. She was at our house for the dinner we made the night we decided to stop trying. A quiet meal with too much wine and very little talking, and she sat across from me and reached over and put her hand on mine and said, "You are going to be okay." And I believed her. She already knew Patrick by then, of course. She had known him for 9 years. She had been at our wedding. She had been at our kitchen table more times than I could count. She had called him Patrick for 9 years and laughed at his jokes and told me on more than one occasion that I had done well. What I did not know then, what I was sitting in my office upstairs piecing together on a Thursday night in late October with a notepad and a pen and a very particular kind of stillness, was that Cassandra had already been in Patrick's car the week before that quiet dinner, and the week before that, and for approximately 4 years before that. She had held my hand at the fertility clinic. She had told me I was going to be okay. She had stood 3 feet to my left in a pale blue dress and held my bouquet while I said my vows. And she had already been in Patrick's car the week before. Patrick slept in the guest room that night. He did not ask. He simply gathered a few things from the bathroom, his toothbrush, the face wash he had used for 15 years, a pillow from his side of the bed, and moved down the hall without a word, which told me he had thought about this moment before. Had rehearsed it, at least in his head. The confession had been planned. The aftermath, apparently, had been too. I lay in our bed and stared at the ceiling fan and counted the rotations the way you count things when your brain needs something to do other than process what has just happened. I did not sleep. Not really. I drifted in and out of something that resembled sleep the way a parking lot resembles a park, same general flatness, none of the peace. At 5:45 in the morning, I gave up entirely. I went downstairs, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen counter watching it drip. With the strange clarity that comes from a night of not sleeping, I decided I needed to approach this the way I approached every complicated financial situation that came across my desk, methodically, without emotion clouding the process, one column at a time. Patrick left for work at 7:15. I heard the shower, heard the familiar sounds of his morning routine, the particular cadence I knew better than my own, and then I heard the front door close. I waited until I heard his car back out of the driveway. Then I went to the kitchen to pour a second cup of coffee. That was when I saw the phone. It was sitting on the counter next to the toaster, face down, the way Patrick always said it when charging overnight. Except it was not plugged in. It had simply been left there. Patrick never forgot his phone. In 19 years, I could count on one hand the number of times he had left the house without it. He treated that phone the way some people treat a limb. Its absence from his person on this particular morning was not an accident. I looked at it for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I am not a person who goes through other people's phones. I had never once, in 19 years of marriage, picked up Patrick's phone with any intention other than to hand it to him or plug it in. I believe in privacy. I believe in the fundamental human dignity of an unread message. I also believe in data, and the phone sitting on my kitchen counter, left there by a man who had just confessed to a 4-year affair, was data. I picked it up. The screen was locked, but a notification had come through and was visible on the lock screen. A text message previewed just the first line, the way notifications do when they are taunting you with exactly enough information to ensure you cannot function until you know the rest. She kicked for the first time last night. I set the phone back down, picked it up again. She kicked for the first time last night. I wish you were here. The sender was listed under a name I did not recognize, not Cassandra. 2 initials and a last name, the kind of contact label a person uses when they are trying to make something look like a professional connection in case a spouse ever glances at the screen. I had not known about this name. I had not known there was a name to not know about. I set the phone down carefully and stood in my kitchen and breathed for approximately 3 minutes. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the therapist I saw after our second IVF failure had taught me. The breathing pattern I used when I needed to get through something without coming apart at the seams. Then I went upstairs to my office. My office is the smallest bedroom in the house. It has a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a bookshelf, and a framed print on the wall that says, in very small letters, "In God we trust. All others must provide documentation." My father gave it to me when I passed my CPA exam. I have looked at it every working day for 22 years, and it has never been more relevant than it was on that Friday morning. I opened my laptop, pulled up a new spreadsheet, sat for a moment with my hands on the keyboard. Then I typed the name of the file. Patrick Audit. I navigated to our joint banking account. The login loaded easily. We had always used the same credentials, the marital equivalent of a shared umbrella, the assumption being that 2 people in a household had no secrets worth protecting from each other. I started at the top of the transaction history and worked my way down. I am a CPA with 22 years of experience. I have spent my career looking at financial records and finding the things that people do not want found. People hide money in patterns. The patterns are always there if you know where to look and are willing to look carefully enough. I looked carefully. The withdrawal started in late 2020. Small at first, 300 here, 500 there. The kind of numbers that register as nothing in a healthy joint account, the kind you attribute to cash expenses or a forgotten ATM trip. But they were regular, every 2 to 3 weeks, like a subscription, like a bill being paid. By mid-2021, the amounts had grown. And there was something else I had not expected. A second account linked to our profile, sitting in the navigation menu as quietly as if it had always been there. A home equity line of credit. Opened in March of 2021. Drawn against the house on Trad Street, the house my father had called an investment in our grandchildren. $55,000. I clicked on the documentation section. A scanned copy of the original application loaded on my screen. 2 signature lines. Patrick's on the left, and on the right, in handwriting that was close to mine but not quite right, the loops a little too wide, the slant a little too steep, my middle name spelled Louis instead of Louise, a signature that was supposed to be me. I had not signed anything. I read the signature 3 times. Louise, Louise. Patrick had written Louis, no E. 19 years of marriage, joint tax returns, a mortgage, 2 car loans, and the man could not spell the middle name he had written on our marriage license. I opened a new browser tab and typed the name of a family law attorney my colleague had mentioned at a conference 18 months ago in Colombia. I had filed the name away in the back of my mind, the way you store information you hope you never need. Margaret Holloway, Meeting Street, Charleston. I wrote her number on my notepad, directly below the word audit. Then I went back to the spreadsheet and kept working. There is something almost peaceful about a spreadsheet when your life is falling apart. Everything has a column, everything has a place. Debits on the left, credits on the right, every transaction accounted for, every dollar traceable to a source and a destination, unlike, say, a marriage. Unlike the feeling of sitting in your home office on a Friday morning in October with cold coffee and the growing certainty that the financial records of your household have been telling a story for 3 years that you were simply not reading. I printed the bank statements first, 18 months of them, which was as far back as the online portal would let me go without submitting a formal records request. I laid them out on my desk in chronological order, oldest to newest, the way I would arrange any client's documents before beginning an audit. Then I picked up my yellow highlighter and started at the beginning. The pattern emerged within the first 20 minutes. Starting in October of 2020, there were cash withdrawals, regular ones, $300 on the 4th, $450 on the 19th, $275 on the 3rd of the following month. None of them large enough to trigger alarm individually, all of them consistent enough when viewed together to constitute a clear and deliberate pattern. I highlighted each one in yellow. By the time I reached the statements from 2021, there was more yellow on those pages than white. Then the wire transfers started. Not to Cassandra's name, I checked for that immediately and found nothing, which told me he was not entirely careless, just mostly careless. The transfers went to an account I did not recognize, a routing number I had never seen associated with our finances. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $800 there. Then, in March of 2021, the month he opened the home equity line of credit, the amounts changed. $1,100. Every month, without exception, for 28 consecutive months. I did not need to be a real estate professional to recognize that number. I had helped Cassandra find her apartment in Midtown 3 years ago, had driven with her to look at 3 different units on a Saturday afternoon, had sat beside her while she signed her lease. The rent on that apartment was $1,100 a month. I wrote the number on my notepad, drew a circle around it, wrote beside it 28 months. Then I did the arithmetic, which took approximately 4 seconds, because I have been doing arithmetic in my head since I was 9 years old, and my father started quizzing me at the dinner table. $28,800. In rent alone. I got up and refilled my coffee. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked at the garden, the jasmine my mother had helped me plant along the back fence, the gardenia bush that bloomed every May without fail, the brick path that Patrick had laid himself one weekend in 2015 with the focused satisfaction of a man who enjoyed doing things with his hands. Then I went back upstairs and sat back down at my desk and kept going. The Venmo transactions were easier to find than I expected. Patrick had not made his account private, which told me one of 2 things. Either he did not understand that Venmo activity was visible by default, or he had become so comfortable with the arrangement that the possibility of discovery had stopped feeling real to him. I suspected both. I scrolled through 14 months of transactions. Most were unremarkable. Splits with colleagues for lunch, a payment to a contractor who had done some work on the gutters, fantasy football dues, which I chose not to comment on internally because there was only so much a person could process at one time. And then, mixed in among the ordinary transactions, the others. Groceries, said one memo. Car repair, said another. Just the one word, supplies. And then, dated 11 months ago, 2 months before Cassandra had announced her pregnancy to anyone, 2 months before anyone in our circle of friends and family had known there was a pregnancy, to announce a transaction for $940 with a memo that read, nursery furniture. I sat with that one for a while. $940 for nursery furniture. For a nursery I did not know existed. For a baby I did not know was coming. Purchase with money from our joint account, the account that my salary fed into every 2 weeks, the account that my father's $40,000 had passed through on its way to the down payment on our house. I added up the Venmo transactions that were clearly personal. The groceries, the car repair, the supplies, the nursery furniture, the other payments with memos that were either blank or vague enough to be deliberately uninformative. The total came to $18,500. I stared at that number for a long time. $18,500. That was the exact cost of the 3rd round of IVF that we could not afford in 2015. The modified protocol with the better odds. The one Patrick had sat at the kitchen table and told me, with what I had understood to be genuine regret, that we simply could not swing right now, maybe next year. He had spent $18,500 on Venmo transactions for Cassandra, groceries and car repairs and nursery furniture for the child he was having with my best friend. And he had told me we could not afford the $18,500 that might have given us a child of our own. I set my pen down. I did not throw anything. I did not say anything out loud because there was no one in the house to hear it, and I have never seen the point of performing emotions for an empty room. I simply sat at my desk with my hands flat on the surface and breathed, deliberately, in through the nose, out through the mouth, and let the full weight of what the numbers were telling me settle into my understanding. Then I picked up my pen. I wrote the total at the bottom of my notepad page. Below that, I wrote the HELOC figure. Below that, I added the monthly rent transfers. I drew a line under everything and calculated the sum. $47,300. He had $47,300 for her. He did not have $18,500 for me. I tore the page from the notepad. I folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my filing cabinet. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had written below the word audit. Margaret Holloway answered on the second ring. Margaret Holloway's office is on Meeting Street, above a coffee shop that always smells like burnt espresso, accessible by a narrow staircase that someone has painted a very confident shade of navy blue. The waiting area has 2 chairs, a small side table with a succulent that looks like it has survived several difficult periods and come out stronger for it, and a framed quote on the wall that reads, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." I appreciated the honesty. It seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Margaret herself came out to meet me before I had finished sitting down. She is somewhere in her early 60s, with silver hair cut short and practical, reading glasses on a tortoiseshell chain, and a handshake that communicated immediately that she had very little time and intended to use all of it efficiently. She had been practicing family law in Charleston for 31 years. She did not make small talk. She opened her office door, gestured to the chair across from her desk, sat down, picked up a legal pad, and said, "Start from the beginning. Leave out the feelings for now. Just give me the facts." I liked her immediately. I told her everything in the order it had happened: the confession on Thursday evening, the phone left on the counter Friday morning, the file I had named Patrick Audit, the bank statements and the pattern of withdrawals going back to October of 2020, the wire transfers $1,100 every month for 28 consecutive months to an account I had traced through the routing number to a regional bank with a branch 2 blocks from Cassandra's apartment in Midtown. The Venmo transactions totaling $18,500, including the one dated 2 months before anyone knew Cassandra was pregnant, with the memo that read nursery furniture. And then I told her about the home equity line of credit. Margaret had been writing steadily on her legal pad throughout. When I got to the HELOC, she stopped writing and looked up. $55,000 credit line, I said, opened March of 2021, $49,000 already drawn. And at the bottom of the application, on the co-borrower signature line, a signature that is meant to be mine but is not. Margaret set her pen down. She folded her hands on the desk. "You are certain it is not your signature," she said. "My middle name is Louise," I said. "Louise," he wrote Lewis. No E at the end. I have signed that name approximately 10,000 times in my life. I know what it looks like. That is not what it looks like. Margaret picked her pen back up. She wrote something on the legal pad and underlined it twice. "Do you have a copy of the application with you?" I opened my folder and slid it across the desk. Margaret studied it for a long moment, her reading glasses low on her nose, her expression entirely unreadable. Then she set it to one side and looked at me. "All right," she said, "here is where you stand." She explained it clearly, and without condescension, which I appreciated. South Carolina is an equitable distribution state, she said, which means the court divides marital assets fairly, but not necessarily equally. The affair itself does not give me additional legal ammunition in the property division. The court does not adjudicate matters of the heart. What the court does care about, deeply and specifically, is money. The $47,300 Patrick had directed to Cassandra over 3 years constituted dissipation of marital assets. He had spent joint money that belonged to both of us equally, on something that had nothing to do with our marriage and everything to do with undermining it. I had a legal right to be compensated for that in the property settlement. The HELOC was a separate and more serious matter. He had borrowed $55,000 against jointly owned property without my knowledge or consent. The forged signature elevated that from a financial dispute to potential fraud. As a practical matter, Margaret said, I had two options. I could pursue the forgery criminally, which would introduce complications and timelines, or I could use it as leverage in the civil proceedings, holding the threat of a criminal referral over the negotiation like a very well-documented sword. Her recommendation was the latter. The threat of a forgery charge, she said, is often considerably more useful than an actual forgery charge. And my parents' $40,000, I said? The down payment contribution. I have the original cashier's check documentation and the closing paperwork. Margaret looked at me over her glasses for a moment. You came prepared, she said. I am a CPA, I said. I always come prepared. She almost smiled. Almost. That documentation, she said, strengthens your claim to a disproportionate share of the home equity. Combined with the dissipation finding and the fraudulent HELOC, you are not in a bad position. You are in an excellent one. He was sloppy. And sloppy is my favorite kind of opposing party. He used password 123 as his banking password, I said, and considered himself technologically sophisticated because he could operate a smart television. Margaret took off her reading glasses. She looked at me directly for the first time since I had sat down, a long, evaluating look, and then she put her glasses back on. I am going to enjoy this case, she said. And for the first time since Thursday evening, something shifted in my chest that was not grief or anger or the cold mechanical process of financial analysis. It was small and tentative, and I did not entirely trust it. But it was there. On the drive home, I thought about 2015. I thought about sitting in the parking lot of the fertility clinic after our second IVF failed, doing the math, calculating the odds. I thought about the modified protocol and the better odds, and the $18,500 and Patrick sitting at the kitchen table with his steady architect's hands and his expression of genuine regret telling me we simply could not swing it right now. I thought about the nursery furniture memo. I thought about Cassandra in the waiting room of that clinic, sitting beside me with a crossword puzzle, her hand on mine saying, "You are going to be okay." I pulled into the driveway on Trad Street and sat in the car for a long moment. Then I went inside, went upstairs to my office, opened the Patrick audit file, and added a new tab to the spreadsheet. I labeled it Next Steps. Margaret had given me 4 things to do before I left her office that afternoon. First, do not leave the marital home. In South Carolina, voluntary departure from the family residence before the legal filing can complicate property claims in ways that are difficult to undo. The house on Trad Street was mine as much as it was Patrick's, and I was not going anywhere. Second, open a separate bank account in my name only at a different institution and begin redirecting a portion of my paycheck there immediately. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would register as suspicious. Just a quiet, steady reassignment of resources. Third, gather every document I could locate, tax returns for the past 5 years, the original closing paperwork from 2009 with my parents' cashier's check notation, all bank statements, printed and digital, the HELOC application with the forged signature, every Venmo printout, everything organized, indexed, and copied twice. Fourth, do not tell my mother. Margaret had looked at me over her reading glasses when she said that one. She had not elaborated, but the look communicated clearly that this was not a suggestion. It was the most important item on the list and the one most likely to go wrong. I knew she was right. I knew it the way you know certain things about yourself that you would prefer not to know clearly, uncomfortably, without any possibility of arguing your way out of it. My mother, Beverly Tatum, is 72 years old, lives in Columbia in the house where I grew up, and loves me with the complete and slightly suffocating devotion of a woman who has organized her entire emotional life around her children's well-being. She also loves everyone I love. She had loved Patrick for 19 years. She had loved Cassandra for 26. And Beverly Tatum, bless her heart, cannot keep a secret to save her life or anyone else's. I managed 4 days. 4 days of gathering documents and opening a new account at First Federal on East Bay Street and directing $350 of each paycheck into it and going to work and answering emails and pretending to be a functioning member of society while my interior life resembled a controlled demolition in progress. 4 days of Patrick moving carefully around the house, like a man trying not to detonate something, cooking dinner twice with the apologetic enthusiasm of someone who understood that pasta was not going to fix this, but could not think of anything else to offer. 4 days of sleeping in our bed alone and staring at the ceiling fan and thinking about numbers. On the 4th day, a Monday evening, I called Beverly. I told myself I was calling to check in. I told myself I would not mention Patrick or Cassandra or any of it. I told myself I was simply going to hear my mother's voice and talk about something ordinary, her garden, the neighbor's new dog, the book club she had joined at the library, and that would be enough. I got approximately 45 seconds into the call before Beverly said, "Honey, Patrick called me last week." I closed my eyes. "He called you," I said. "He did. He was very upset." Beverly paused. "He told me what happened with Cassandra." Of course he had. Of course Patrick had called my mother before I did, probably within hours of the confession, probably from the guest room while I was upstairs writing the word audit on a notepad. Getting ahead of the narrative. Controlling the story before I could tell my version of it. I had been a CPA for 22 years. I understood exactly what that maneuver was, and I should have seen it coming. "Mom," I said carefully, "what did he tell you?" "He said he had made a terrible mistake, that he was sorry, that he loves you." Beverly's voice had that particular quality it gets when she is trying to navigate between two things she cares about: careful, slightly elevated, the verbal equivalent of walking a tightrope in sensible shoes. He also said Cassandra is in a very difficult position. I let that sit for a moment. "A difficult position," I said. "She is pregnant and alone and—" "She is pregnant," I said, with my husband's child. After a 4-year relationship that she conducted while sitting at my kitchen table and holding my hand at fertility appointments and telling me I was going to be okay. Beverly was quiet. "I know," she said finally. "I know, Renee. But she is still—" "Do not," I said. "Please do not finish that sentence." Another silence. Longer this time. "I just think," Beverly said, "that there might be a way through this that does not have to destroy everyone. If you could just talk to her, if you could hear her side." "Mom," I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am handling this. I have a lawyer. I need you to not call Cassandra. I need you to not tell her anything I have told you. Can you do that for me?" "Of course," Beverly said. She called Cassandra within 2 hours. I found out because Cassandra texted me that same evening. I was in my office, cross-referencing the HELOC draw schedule against Patrick's Venmo activity, when my phone lit up on the desk beside my laptop. I glanced at it. Cassandra's name on the screen. I picked up the phone and read the message. "Renee, I think we should talk. Your mom mentioned you've been looking into some financial things. I just want you to know I can explain." She could explain. I set the phone face down on the desk. I sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then I stood up, walked to my filing cabinet, and began reorganizing the contents alphabetically by category. Tax documents, bank records, legal correspondence, property records. I worked through the entire cabinet, both drawers, every hanging folder, every manila envelope, with the focused intensity of a person who has decided that if she cannot control the situation, she can at the very least control the filing system. It was 11:45 at night when I finished. I stood back and looked at the cabinet, everything in its place, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Some people pour a drink when the world falls apart. Some people call a friend. Some people go for a run in the dark, or eat an entire sleeve of crackers, or watch 3 consecutive hours of home renovation television. I color code folders. We all have our coping mechanisms. Mine happened to be alphabetized. Patrick came home on Tuesday evening with grocery store flowers. The kind that come in a cellophane wrapper with a small packet of flower food attached by a rubber band, the packet that no one in the history of civilization has ever actually used, because the kind of person who buys flowers from the grocery store on the way home from work is not the kind of person who is thinking about long-term floral preservation. He set them on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker and looked at me with an expression that was attempting hopefulness and landing somewhere closer to seasick. I looked at the flowers. Then I looked at him. "They're beautiful," I said. "Thank you." They were not beautiful. They were a mixed bouquet with 2 carnations, which are the participation trophy of the flower world, and a piece of baby's breath that was already going brown at the edges. But I smiled at them the way you smile at something you have no intention of engaging with honestly, and I put them in a vase with water, and I went back to making dinner. Patrick hovered. This is the only word for what he did. He moved around the kitchen's periphery with the restless, purposeless energy of a man who has things he wants to say and no viable way to say them. He asked about my day. He commented on the weather. He opened the refrigerator twice without taking anything out. He was performing normalcy with the conviction of someone who had never actually studied the subject. I performed it back at him. I answered his questions. I laughed at something that was not particularly funny. I made pasta the good kind, with the sauce from scratch, because I needed something to do with my hands, and also because I was not going to let the fact that my marriage was actively dismantling itself be a reason to serve mediocre food in my own kitchen. We ate dinner. We talked about things that did not matter. I washed the dishes afterward, which I always do, and Patrick dried them, which he sometimes does when he is feeling guilty about something, and the whole domestic tableau was so precisely normal that it would have been funny if it had not been so specifically terrible. He went to bed at 10. I told him I was going to stay up and finish some work. I was not going to finish some work. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and waited. I listened to the sounds of the house settling into night, the creak of the bedroom floorboards, the familiar groan of the pipes when Patrick ran the bathroom faucet, the eventual silence that meant he had turned off the bedside lamp. I gave it another 30 minutes. Then I opened the banking portal. Password rejected. I typed it again, carefully. The way you type something when you suspect the problem is not your typing. Password rejected. I tried the email recovery option, the security questions, the backup verification code sent to the phone number on file, which was Patrick's phone number, not mine. A detail I had never thought to change in 19 years because I had never imagined I would need to. Every door was locked. Patrick had changed the passwords, not just the banking password, the email recovery, the security questions, the backup verification, all of it, systematically and thoroughly, the kind of thorough that requires sitting down and thinking it through. He had done this while I was washing the dishes that he dried, while we were performing normalcy at each other across the kitchen counter. I closed the laptop. I sat for a moment with my hands flat on the table. Then I almost laughed. Not the good kind of laughter, not the warm, genuine, something is actually funny kind. The other kind, the kind that comes when a situation reveals itself to be even more precisely what you expected it to be, that the accuracy of it is almost impressive. Patrick thought he was blocking me. What Patrick did not know, what he could not know, because he had waited one day too long, and I had spent that day being very, very good at my job, was that I had already printed everything. Every bank statement, every wire transfer record, every Venmo transaction, the HELOC application with the forged signature and the misspelled middle name, 14 months of documentation, organized and indexed and sitting in a locked drawer in my office filing cabinet with a copy at Margaret's office on Meeting Street, because Margaret Holloway had told me on day 1 to get her copies of everything immediately, and I had done exactly that. Every single page. I called Margaret the next morning from my car in the parking garage at work, before I went inside. "He changed the passwords," I said when she answered. "Good," Margaret said. She did not sound surprised. She did not sound anything in particular, which was one of the things I had come to appreciate about her in a very short period of time. She processed information the way I process spreadsheets efficiently, without editorializing, moving immediately to the next relevant question. "He changed them after you already pulled the records," she said. "That means you have the documentation and he has demonstrated a consciousness of guilt. Every move he makes now, the passwords, the flowers, whatever else he tries, it all goes in the file. He is building my case for me, and he does not know it." I sat in my car and let that settle. The thing Patrick had done to shut me out had made my position stronger. He had seen the wall closing in, and instead of standing still, he had run directly into it. He had played himself, completely, and without any assistance from me, and he did not even know it yet. He was going to know it, but not yet. Margaret told me the legal separation paperwork would be ready to file by end of week. She had also drafted an asset protection motion, citing the HELOC, the drained savings, and the pattern of transfers, requesting that the court freeze certain accounts pending resolution. Patrick would be served at his office at the firm downtown by a process server, in front of his colleagues. I had not specifically requested that detail, but I did not ask Margaret to change it either. I went into work, I answered my emails, I reviewed a quarterly audit for a hospitality client on King Street and found a discrepancy in their accounts payable that their previous accountant had missed for 2 years running. I fixed it. I moved on. Outside my office window, Charleston went about its Tuesday in the usual way, entirely unaware that somewhere across town, in a firm on Broad Street, a process server was about to make Patrick Whitfield's morning considerably more complicated than he had planned for. I called in sick on a Wednesday. I told my supervisor, a measured and reasonable woman named Carol Beaumont, who has run the Charleston office of our firm for 11 years with the quiet authority of someone who has seen everything and been surprised by very little, that I had a stomach thing. Which was not technically a lie. I had been nauseous for 11 consecutive days. A low-grade persistent nausea that had nothing to do with any virus and everything to do with the specific physical manifestation of sustained emotional devastation, which apparently expresses itself in the digestive system before anywhere else. The human body is, in my experience, deeply unsubtle. Carol said to feel better and told me the Hendricks audit could wait until Thursday. I thanked her and hung up and lay back down on the couch. I had moved to the couch sometime in the night. Not for any particular reason, I had simply migrated there in the small hours of the morning, the way you migrate toward whatever feels marginally less wrong when everything feels wrong. The couch in our living room faces the window that looks out onto the piazza, and from where I was lying I could see the jasmine on the railing and a strip of gray October sky and the upper branches of the oak tree in the garden that Patrick had pruned himself 3 years ago with the careful attention he brought to a Jane C's pride, anything structural. I watched the oak tree for a while. Then I turned on the television. I watched cooking competition shows for 9 hours. I am not proud of this. I want to be clear that I understand, in the abstract, that lying on a couch for 9 hours watching strangers make elaborate desserts under time pressure is not a productive response to a marital crisis. I understand that. I also understand that there is a particular anesthetic quality to competition, television, that contain drama, the clear rules, the guarantee that by the end of the episode, someone will have won and someone will have lost, and the outcome will be definitive. That is profoundly appealing when your own situation has no clear rules and no visible finish line, and the score is impossible to calculate. So I watched 14 contestants attempt a technical challenge involving choux pastry. I watched a man from Portland cry because his soufflé collapsed. I watched a woman from Atlanta produce a 6-layer cake with hand-painted sugar flowers that made the judges go temporarily silent, which is the cooking competition equivalent of a standing ovation. At noon, I ate half a container of ice cream. At 3, I ate the other half. Between those two events, I did not move from the couch except to use the bathroom and refill my water glass, because even in the depths of emotional collapse I was staying hydrated, which is either admirable or beside the point, depending on how you look at it. Patrick texted twice. I read the messages without responding. They were apologetic in the way that texts from people who have done genuinely terrible things tend to be apologetic, full of the right words, in an order that doesn't quite add up to meaning, like a sentence translated through 3 languages and back again. I put the phone face down on the coffee table and went back to the soufflé man from Portland. It was Diane who got me off the couch. Diane Morrison has been my friend for 14 years, since we met at a professional development seminar in Columbia that neither of us wanted to attend, and both of us were attending only because our respective firms had strongly encouraged it. We had ended up at the same table for lunch, united by mutual reluctance, and had been friends ever since. She is a civil litigation attorney with an office on Broad Street, a dry sense of humor, and an absolute zero-tolerance policy for what she calls the mythology of suffering, the idea that staying in pain longer somehow makes you more deserving of sympathy or more entitled to a good outcome. She did not call before she came. She simply appeared at my front door at 6:30 in the evening with takeout bags from Husk and a bottle of wine, and the expression of a woman who has assessed a situation and decided exactly what it requires. She looked at me, the unwashed hair, the ice cream evidence, the stack of bank statements I had migrated to the coffee table at some point between the choux pastry episode and the soufflé, and she did not say anything sympathetic. She did not say, "I'm so sorry," or "How are you holding up," or any of the things people say when they want to acknowledge pain without actually sitting inside it with you. She set the takeout on the coffee table. She took off her shoes. Diane always takes her shoes off in other people's houses. It is one of her most consistent qualities, and she sat down on the floor beside the couch. Not on the couch. On the floor, cross-legged, with her back against the cushions, like she was settling in for something that might take a while. She said, "Tell me." So I did. I told her everything, in the order it had happened, the same way I had told Margaret, except with considerably more feeling and considerably less legal precision. I told her about the confession and the phone and the spreadsheet and the HELOC and the forged signature and the $47,000 and the nursery furniture and the $18,500 for the IVF that we could not afford, and Beverly calling Cassandra and the passwords and the flowers and the process server who had, according to a brief and deeply satisfying text from Margaret that afternoon, successfully served Patrick at his office in front of 3 colleagues and his assistant. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You can fall apart. You are absolutely entitled to fall apart. But here's the thing about falling apart at some point. You have to decide whether you are doing it or whether it is doing you. And right now, it looks like it is doing you." I looked at the ceiling. "That is accurate," I said. "So here is what is going to happen," Diane said. "You are going to eat this food because it is from husk and it would be a genuine tragedy to waste it. Then you are going to shower. Then you are going to sleep in an actual bed. And tomorrow morning, you are going to get up and put on real clothes and go back to being Renee Whitfield, CPA, who is extremely good at her job and has an excellent attorney and a stronger legal position than the man who thought password 123 was an acceptable choice for a banking password." I almost smiled. Almost. "Pick," Diane said simply. "Fall apart or get even, but you cannot do both at the same time." I reached for the takeout bag. I picked. Thursday morning I showered. This sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. It was the first deliberate act of self-reassembly in 11 days, and I approached it with the same intentionality I bring to the first line of a new audit. This is where we begin. This is the starting point. Everything before this moment is prior period, and we are moving forward from here. I put on actual pants. I drove to work. I answered my emails with the focused efficiency of a person who has decided that the professional sphere of her life will remain functional, regardless of what is happening in the personal one, because some walls are worth maintaining, and that particular wall has kept me standing through 2 failed IVF cycles and a miscarriage at 11 weeks, and a dog dying, and a promotion I did not get in 2018 that I deserved considerably more than the man who received it. I know how to compartmentalize. It is not always healthy. On this particular Thursday, it was exactly what was required. At lunch, I called Margaret from my car. The asset protection motion had been granted, she told me. The court had reviewed the HELOC documentation, the pattern of withdrawals, and the evidence of ongoing transfers, and had agreed that there was sufficient cause to freeze the joint accounts pending resolution of the property division. Patrick could not move money. He could not draw further on the HELOC. He could not sell, transfer, or encumber any jointly held asset without court approval. He had also, Margaret informed me, with the particular tone she used when conveying information she found professionally satisfying, retained an attorney. A man named Gerald Fitch, who practiced out of an office on Rutledge Avenue, and whose primary area of expertise was, according to his firm's website, business litigation rather than family law. He hired a business litigator for a divorce case, I said. He did, Margaret said. I thought about that for a moment. That is like hiring a cardiologist to fix a broken arm, I said. Margaret made a sound that in a less composed person might have been a laugh. It is not dissimilar, she agreed. Mr. Fitch is a competent attorney in his area. Family law is not his area. We will manage. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes and thought about Patrick hiring Gerald Fitch. Patrick, who had used password 123 as his banking password. Patrick, who had forged my signature and misspelled my middle name. Patrick, who had bought grocery store carnations as a reconciliation gesture after 4 years of systematic financial deception. Patrick, who was now paying a business litigator to navigate a family court proceeding. He was consistent, at least. I would give him that. I went back inside and finished the Hendricks audit. Then I stayed late, after the rest of the office had cleared out, and opened my personal laptop at my desk and logged into the Patrick audit file. I had been adding to it steadily for 10 days. It was now a document of considerable substance, 17 tabs, color-coded, with a summary sheet at the front that laid out the total financial picture in terms that would be immediately legible to anyone, including a family court judge, who happened to look at it. I opened a new tab. I had been thinking about something Margaret had said in our first meeting, that Patrick had been sloppy. And sloppy people, in my professional experience, are not sloppy in one direction only. They are sloppy comprehensively. If he had been careless enough to use a visible Venmo account and a forged signature with the wrong spelling, it was reasonable to assume there were other things he had not bothered to hide properly. I started with the business accounts. Patrick was a partner at his architectural firm, which meant he had both a personal salary and a share of the firm's distributions. I knew the general contours of this from 19 years of joint tax returns, but I had never examined the details closely because I had trusted him with the details. Which, as I have mentioned, is the kind of sentence that should come with a warning label printed directly on the marriage license. I pulled up the tax returns for the past 5 years. I cross-referenced his reported income against the deposits to our joint account. The numbers matched for the first 3 years. In year 4, 2021, the same year he opened the HELOC, they did not. The discrepancy was not large, $11,000 in distributions that had been reported on the tax return but had not appeared in our joint account, not large enough to notice if you were not looking carefully, entirely visible if you were. I opened a new browser tab and searched for the business entity registration for his firm. In South Carolina, partnership agreements and distribution records are not public documents, but the entity registration is. The registered agent address had changed in 2021. New registered agent, new address. I wrote the address on my notepad. Then I searched it. The address belonged to a property management company on James Island, a company that managed, according to its website, a portfolio of residential rental properties across the Charleston area. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I navigated to the county property records database, which is public, and searched for properties associated with Patrick Whitfield's name. 2 came up. The house on Trad Street, which I knew about, and a 2-bedroom condominium on Folly Beach, purchased in March of 2022, listed under Patrick Whitfield and a limited liability company I had never heard of, for $312,000. I sat back in my chair. A condominium on Folly Beach, purchased 11 months after he opened the HELOC, managed by a property management company whose registered agent address had quietly replaced the firm's original address in the same year. A real estate investment that had never appeared on a joint tax return, never been mentioned in 19 years of shared financial conversations, never existed in any version of our household finances that I had been permitted to see. I picked up my phone and opened the email app. I typed Margaret's address in the to field. In the subject line, I wrote, New Asset Folly Beach. In the body, I wrote the address, the purchase date, the price, and the LLC name. I attached the screenshots from the county property records. I hit send. Margaret's response came 47 seconds later. 4 words. Do not tell Patrick. I had not been planning to. Carol Beaumont called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. Carol's office is the corner one, with windows on 2 sides that look out over the intersection of King and Calhoun, and she has decorated it with the restrained precision of a woman who understands that an office is a professional statement and not a personal one. 2 framed prints, both abstract, both in shades of gray and cream, a single photograph of her family on the credenza, a succulent on the windowsill that she has kept alive for 6 years through what I can only assume is sheer force of will. She was sitting behind her desk when I came in, her reading glasses on, a folder open in front of her, and she gestured to the chair across from her with the economy of motion that characterizes everything she does. I sat down. She looked at me over her glasses for a moment, in the way that Carol looks at things when she is assessing them directly, without self-consciousness, as though looking is a professional skill she has developed alongside all her others. "Renee," she said, "the senior partner review panel meets in 3 weeks. You are one of 2 finalists." I had known this was coming. I had been informally managing the operations of the Charleston office for 2 years, absorbing responsibilities that technically belonged to a position that had been vacant since David Carmichael retired, doing the work without the title or the compensation, because that is what you do when you care about the work in the firm and you believe that eventually the appropriate people will notice. Carol had noticed. She had been noticing for a while. I had known the formal announcement was approaching. What I had not known was whether I would still want it when it arrived. "I have noticed you seem distracted these past few weeks," Carol said. She said it without judgment, the way she says most things, as an observation, offered for consideration, not as a criticism. "Is everything all right?" I looked at Carol Beaumont in her Friday afternoon office, with the gray and cream prints and the 6-year-old succulent, and I made a decision that I had not known I was going to make until the moment I made it. "Family stuff," I said. "I am handling it." Carol nodded. She had the grace not to ask further. She had also, I suspected, a reasonable idea of what family stuff meant, because Carol Beaumont had been running a professional office for 11 years and had seen the particular quality of distraction that domestic crisis produces in otherwise high-functioning people, and she was far too perceptive to mistake it for anything else. "The interview panel meets in 3 weeks," she said. "I would hate to see you withdraw." "I am not withdrawing," I said. And I meant it. I meant it the way I had meant picking up the takeout bag at Diane's instruction, not as a performance of strength, but as an actual choice, made in full awareness of the alternatives. Patrick and Cassandra had taken 19 years of my marriage. They had taken $47,000 of my money and a 3rd round of IVF that might have changed the entire shape of my life. They were not going to take my career. That particular thing was mine, and I was keeping it. I left Carol's office and went back to my desk and worked until 6:30, which is later than I usually stay but felt necessary. The way physical activity feels necessary after a period of stillness, the body insisting on its own continued function regardless of what the mind is doing. I drove home along the river. The light on the water that time of evening in October is something particular to Charleston. Gold and low and slightly hazy. The kind of light that makes the city look like a painting of itself, rather than the actual thing. I have lived here for 21 years, and it still stops me sometimes. The beauty of a place does not diminish because your life is difficult. I have always found that both comforting and faintly annoying. Patrick's car was not in the driveway. He had taken to spending certain evenings out. I did not ask where, and he did not volunteer the information, and we had settled into a careful domestic coexistence that resembled a ceasefire more than a marriage. He slept in the guest room. He made coffee in the mornings. He moved through the house with the apologetic economy of a man who understood he was living on borrowed time and borrowed space and was trying not to take up more of, either than strictly necessary. I made dinner for one, ate it at the kitchen table with a book I was not really reading, washed the single dish, went upstairs. My phone rang at 8:45. Beverly. I considered not answering. I considered it for approximately 4 seconds, which is about as long as I am capable of not answering my mother's calls before the conditioning of 53 years overrides the intention. I answered. "Honey," Beverly said. Her voice was different from the last time we had spoken, smaller. The particular quality of a voice when the person using it has been doing some thinking and has arrived somewhere uncomfortable. "Can I come see you?" I sat on the edge of the bed. "When?" I said. "Tomorrow," she said. "If that is all right." "I want to." She stopped. Started again. "I have been thinking about what you told me. About the money. About all of it. And I want to see you." I looked at the ceiling fan. The same ceiling fan I had been staring at since the night of the confession, counting rotations, looking for answers it did not have. "Yes," I said. "Come tomorrow." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am bringing the pound cake. From the good bakery, not the grocery store one." I understood what that meant. Beverly Tatum has brought grocery store pound cake to casual visits and good bakery pound cake to occasions that require genuine effort or genuine apology for as long as I can remember. The distinction is consistent and intentional and has never once needed to be explained. She owed me something. She knew it. And she was bringing the appropriate pound cake. All right, Mom, I said. I will see you tomorrow. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Outside, the mockingbird that lived in the oak tree Patrick had pruned was going through its evening repertoire, cycling through a dozen borrowed songs, each one belonging to some other bird, assembled into something that was entirely its own. I had always liked mockingbirds. There is something admirable about a creature that takes what it finds and makes it into something new. I went to bed. For the second time since the confession, I slept through the night. Beverly arrived at 10:30 the next morning in her silver Buick that she has been driving for 9 years and refuses to replace on the grounds that it still runs perfectly, and she sees no reason to fix what is not broken, which is a philosophy she applies to most things in life, with results that are, depending on the situation, either admirable or deeply frustrating. She had the pound cake from the Good Bakery, Sullivan's on Main Street in Columbia, the one that has been operating out of the same building since 1978, and whose lemon pound cake is, without any meaningful competition, the best thing produced in the state of South Carolina. She set it on the kitchen counter and she hugged me, and I let her. And for a moment she was simply my mother, and I was simply her daughter, and none of the rest of it existed. Then she pulled back and looked at my face the way mothers look at their children's faces when they are trying to read something that the child has not said out loud. She has been doing this my entire life. She is very good at it. Sit down, Mom, I said. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Patrick had confessed, the same table where I had set down my pen very carefully and walked upstairs to my office. I had thought about that as I set the cups out, the particular weight a piece of furniture accumulates when significant things happen at it. The kitchen table had been carrying a great deal of weight lately. I put the folder on the table between us. Beverly looked at it. She looked at me. She reached out and opened it. She reads the way she does everything carefully, thoroughly, with her index finger tracking the lines the way she used to follow recipes when I was a child, making sure she had every ingredient before she started. She did not rush. She did not make sounds of reaction as she went through the pages, no sharp intakes of breath, no murmured commentary. She simply read. She read the bank statements with the highlighted withdrawals. She read the wire transfer records showing $1,100 every month for 28 consecutive months. She read the Venmo printouts, including the one with the nursery furniture memo. She read the HELOC application with the forged signature and the misspelled middle name. She read the county property records showing the condominium on Folly Beach. And then she reached the page I had printed last, a single sheet with 2 numbers side by side labeled clearly. On the left, $47,300, directed to Cassandra over 3 years. On the right, $18,500. The cost of the IVF round we could not afford in 2015. The one Patrick had sat at this table and told me, with his steady architect's hands and his expression of genuine sorrow, that we simply could not swing right now. Beverly stopped. She looked at the 2 numbers for a long time. Her index finger, which had been tracking steadily through every previous page, went still. He told you there wasn't enough money, she said. Her voice was very quiet. He said we couldn't afford it, Mom. And I believed him. Beverly set both hands flat on the table. She looked at them for a moment, her hands, which are small and capable, the hands that had packed my lunch every day for 12 years, and braided my hair and held mine in the waiting room of the fertility clinic, the one time she had come with me, the time after the second IVF failed, when I had called her from the parking lot because I could not figure out who else to call. I'm sorry, Renee, she said. I looked at her. I was wrong, she said, about calling Cassandra, about telling you to think about her feelings, about she stopped, started again. About a great many things, I think, that I told myself were about keeping the peace, but were actually about my own discomfort with conflict. That is not the same thing. I know that. I had not expected those words. Not because Beverly is not a loving mother, she is completely and without reservation. But because Beverly Tatum has spent 72 years finding the path of least resistance through difficult situations and calling it grace, and the distance between that habit and the words I was wrong is considerable. People do not cross that distance easily. She had crossed it. I cried. I had not cried since the night of the confession. I had processed and analyzed and organized and compartmentalized and made spreadsheets and color-coded folders and eaten ice cream on a couch for 9 hours, but I had not cried because crying felt like it belonged to a version of this situation that I could not afford to inhabit. The version where I was simply a woman whose husband had betrayed her, rather than a CPA with a legal strategy and a 31-year attorney and a locked filing cabinet. But hearing my mother say I was wrong, in this kitchen, at this table, with the pound cake from Sullivan's on the counter and the folder open between us and the two numbers side by side on that last page that broke something open. Not in a bad way. In the way that things break open, when the pressure that has been holding them closed is finally, carefully released. I cried for about 2 minutes. Beverly did not say anything. She moved her chair around the table and put her arm around me the way she had when I was 8 years old and had fallen off my bicycle in the driveway and was trying very hard not to cry in front of the neighbors. Just her arm, just her presence, just the uncomplicated fact of my mother being on my side. Then I dried my face. I straightened up. I poured us both more coffee and cut 2 slices of the Sullivan's pound cake, which was, as always, exactly what it was supposed to be. "Tell me what you need," Beverly said. "I need you to not contact Cassandra," I said, "or Patrick, or anyone connected to either of them. I need you to let Margaret do her job, and I need you to come to dinner on Friday." Beverly looked at me. "What kind of dinner?" she said. "The kind," I said, "where I lay everything on the table, literally, in front of Patrick and Cassandra, with documentation." Beverly was quiet for a moment. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. "Do you want me there?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I need you to know about it, because afterward I am going to call you and I am going to need you to pick up." She nodded. She picked up her coffee cup. She looked out the kitchen window at the garden, at the jasmine on the fence and the gardenia bush and the brick path that Patrick had laid with his careful architect's hands. "I will pick up," she said. I reached over and cut her a second slice of pound cake. She did not protest, which told me everything I needed to know about the state of her guilt. Beverly Tatum does not accept second helpings of anything when her conscience is clear. Then I told her about the dinner. I called Margaret on Friday morning at 9 o'clock from the driveway, before I went back inside. "Everything is in order," she said before I had finished stating why I was calling. She had been expecting me. She had told me once that clients always called the morning of something significant, regardless of whether there was anything new to discuss, because what they needed was not information but confirmation, the professional equivalent of someone checking that the parachute is still attached before you step out of the plane. She had accommodated this particular human need for 22 years without complaint. I appreciated her for it. "The separation agreement is finalized," she said. "The asset protection motion remains in effect. The property division proposal is documented and indexed, accounting for the $47,300 in dissipated marital assets, the fraudulent HELOC, the undisclosed Folly Beach property, and your parents' $40,000 down payment contribution. Gerald Fitch received our preliminary settlement proposal yesterday afternoon." "How did he respond?" I asked. Margaret paused for exactly the length of time that indicated she was about to say something she found professionally satisfying. "He called me," she said, "to ask whether we were serious." "And you told him?" "I told him we were extremely serious and that I looked forward to discussing it further at his earliest convenience." She paused again. He sounded surprised. I found that surprising in return. I thanked her. I put the phone in my pocket and went inside. The house needed cleaning. Not because it was particularly dirty, but because nervous energy has to go somewhere, and I had already alphabetized the filing cabinet twice and reorganized the bookshelf by subject matter and wiped down the kitchen counters with the focused attention of someone conducting a laboratory inspection. Cleaning was the remaining option, and I took it comprehensively: floors, bathrooms, the baseboards in the hallway that I have been meaning to address since approximately 2019, the inside of the refrigerator, which has never in its operational life been more thoroughly organized than it was on that Friday morning in November. I made dinner in the afternoon. Nothing elaborate. Roasted chicken, the same thing I had been making when Patrick came home to confess, which I recognized as either darkly appropriate or simply the most reliable thing in my recipe rotation, and decided it was both. Sweet potatoes. A green salad with the good olive oil, the kind of meal I had made 100 times in that kitchen, in this house, at this address, which was mine as much as it was anyone's and which I was not leaving. I set the table for 3. The good china, a set of cream plates with a narrow border of deep blue and small gold details that had been a wedding gift from Patrick's aunt in Savannah, the ones I had kept in the cabinet for special occasions because I was saving them for something worthy. I looked at the plates as I set them out and decided that this qualified. The folder was behind the coffee maker. I had placed it there that morning, positioned so that it was not visible from the table but accessible in under 3 seconds. I had rehearsed the retrieval. I had rehearsed the entire evening, in fact, standing in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:30 that morning, speaking to my own reflection in a voice that was level and clear and gave nothing away. "You are going to sit at that table," I told the woman in the mirror. "You are not going to raise your voice. You are not going to throw anything. You are going to be the calmest person in the room, and you are going to let the paperwork do the screaming." She looked back at me with an expression I recognized as readiness. It was the same expression I wore walking into a difficult audit, the knowledge that I had done, the preparation, that the numbers were correct, that whatever the other side brought to the table, I had already seen it and accounted for it. Patrick came home at 5:20. He had known about the dinner since Tuesday, when I had called him and said, in the most neutral tone I could produce, that I thought the three of us should sit down together. Clear the air. He had sounded relieved in a way that told me he had misread the invitation entirely, that he had interpreted clear the air as an indication that I was moving towards something conciliatory, that the grocery store flowers had worked after all, that the spaghetti and the careful domestic performance had produced the intended effect. He showered. He put on a clean shirt, the blue one, the one he wore when he wanted to make a good impression, which told me he was trying very hard without entirely understanding what he was trying for. He came downstairs at 5:50 and stood in the kitchen not knowing what to do with his hands, which has always been his tell. Patrick Whitfield does not know what to do with his hands when he is nervous. After 19 years, I could read that man's anxiety by the position of his arms. "Is she coming?" he asked. "At 6, I said. He nodded. He picked up an apple from the fruit bowl and put it back down. He opened the refrigerator and looked into it without taking anything out. He was performing waiting the same way he had performed normalcy the week before, with the conviction of someone who understood the concept theoretically but had never quite mastered it in practice. Cassandra arrived at 6:12, 12 minutes late, which was early for Cassandra. In 26 years of friendship, I had come to understand that Cassandra's relationship with punctuality was aspirational rather than functional. She intended to be on time in the same way that she intended to floss daily, and call her mother every Sunday, with genuine good intentions and inconsistent execution. She knocked, which she had never done before. In 26 years, she had walked into this house the way you walk into a place that belongs to you, partly by virtue of being loved by the people inside it. She knocked on this particular Friday, and I understood that she knew, on some level, that she had forfeited the right to walk in. I opened the door. She looked thinner than the last time I had seen her, at a firm dinner in September. She was wearing a dark green dress, and her hair was down, and she had the particular expression of someone who has prepared for a difficult conversation and is now confronted with the reality that preparation and readiness are not the same thing. Her hands were clasped in front of her, just below where the pregnancy had begun to show a small, unmistakable curve that she was not hiding and not displaying, simply carrying, the way you carry something that is at once yours and not yours. "Thank you for coming," I said. I used my warmest voice. The one that sounds, according to Diane, like someone's favorite aunt about to offer sweet tea on a porch on a summer afternoon. I had been told I could be very convincing with that voice. I was counting on it. Cassandra's eyes went to Patrick. Patrick's eyes went to the floor. The floor, as always, offered no assistance. "Sit down," I said. "Dinner is almost ready." We sat down. We ate first. I know that sounds strange. The reasonable expectation, given everything that had led to this particular Friday evening, is that I would produce the folder immediately and the whole thing would detonate the way these things are supposed to, with noise and heat and visible damage. But I had made roast chicken and sweet potatoes and a salad with the good olive oil, and I was not going to let it go cold. So we ate. The conversation during dinner was the most precisely calibrated performance of normalcy I have ever participated in. Patrick talked about a renovation project on South Battery, and I asked questions in a tone of genuine interest that I had been practicing in the mirror that morning. Cassandra ate carefully and said little, her eyes moving between Patrick and me with the wariness of someone trying to determine where the floor is in a room she no longer trusts. I cleared the plates. I always clear the plates. Then I went to the coffee maker. I retrieved the folder. I set it on the table between them. Not in front of either of them specifically. Between them, equidistant, the way you place a document when you want everyone present to understand that it concerns all parties equally. Patrick looked at it. Something shifted in his face, a small involuntary movement around the eyes, the specific expression of a person who recognizes something they were hoping not to see. Cassandra, I said, I am not here to scream at either of you. I am here because I think you both deserve to understand the full picture, and I am not sure you do. I opened the folder. I laid the first page on the table. Bank statements highlighted in yellow, showing withdrawals beginning October of 2020. I walked through them the way I would walk a client through a financial report clearly, without editorializing, letting the numbers carry the weight. $1,100 every month, I said, for 28 consecutive months. That is your rent in Midtown, $28,800. Cassandra's expression shifted. She was looking at the highlighted statements with a focus that told me this number was larger than what she had understood it to be. I laid the second page on the table. The Venmo printouts, groceries, car repair, medical appointments, and one transaction, dated 2 months before anyone knew she was pregnant, for $940. The memo said nursery furniture. The room was very quiet. I laid the third page on the table. The HELOC application. Patrick borrowed $55,000 against this house, I said. Against the house my parents contributed $40,000 toward in 2009. He drew $49,000 from that line of credit. And at the bottom of the application, on the co-borrower signature line, there is a signature that is supposed to be mine. I slid the application toward Cassandra. She picked it up, she read it, she looked at the signature. My middle name is Louise, I said. Louise. He wrote Lewis. He has known my middle name for 19 years, and he misspelled it on a document he used to borrow money against my house without my knowledge or consent. My attorney describes that as fraud. The court is aware of it. Patrick's face had gone white, not pale. White, the specific colorlessness of a person whose body has received information it does not know how to process. Cassandra, I said, did you know the money was coming from our joint account? She looked up. Her eyes were wet. He told me it was his own money, she said, savings he had set aside separately. He said you would not be affected. I looked at Patrick. He opened his mouth. What came out was not a sentence, the beginning of 3 different sentences, each one abandoned before it reached a verb. It was, I had the accounts were 3 attempts, 0 completions. The man who had maintained a 4-year deception across 2 households and 2 financial tracks could not, seated at a table with the documentation in front of him, complete a single coherent thought. He also told me I said in 2015 that we could not afford a 3rd round of IVF, the modified protocol, better odds. The cost was $18,500. He said we did not have it. I let that sit. The baby, I said. The IVF we did not do. Those 2 things exist in the same financial universe. I want you both to sit with that. Nobody spoke. I reached back to the counter and picked up the final document. The legal separation agreement, signed, notarized, and filed 3 days ago. I said it in front of Patrick. This is your copy, I said. Margaret Holloway is my attorney. Gerald Fitch has received our preliminary property settlement proposal. I would suggest you read this carefully and have a thorough conversation with him about what surprised him. Patrick stared at the document. He did not pick it up. Renee, he said. His voice was very quiet. Can we just... I picked up my purse from the chair by the door. We just did, I said. I looked at the kitchen one last time. The good china on the counter. The coffee maker that groaned every morning like something in its final days but continued functioning regardless, because some things keep going long after they probably should have quit. Margaret says hi, I said. I walked to the front door of the house on Trad Street. I opened it. I stepped through it. I pulled it closed behind me. Not a slam, a close. The specific, deliberate, final sound of a door being shut by someone who has finished with what was on the other side of it. I sat in my car for 30 seconds. I did not look back at the house. I adjusted the rearview mirror not to see the house, simply because it needed adjusting, and I drove to Diane's. She had wine and shrimp and grits waiting because Diane Morrison is the kind of friend that comes around maybe once in a lifetime, and I would fight someone for her without hesitation. Diane's apartment is on Broad Street, 4 blocks from my office, on the second floor of a building that was constructed in 1892 and has the particular character of old Charleston architecture: high ceilings, tall windows, floors that creak in specific places she has memorized so thoroughly that she can navigate her own home in complete darkness without making a sound. She has lived there for 7 years. It smells like coffee and old books and the lavender candles she burns on weekends. It is one of the most calming places I have ever been, which is why I drove there on autopilot without consciously deciding to. She had the door open before I reached the top of the stairs. She looked at me for a moment, at my face, at my posture, at whatever it was that I was carrying that was visible in the way I was standing, and she did not ask how it went. She stepped back and let me in. The wine was already open on the counter. Shrimp and grits from the restaurant on Queen Street, kept warm in the oven. 2 plates, 2 glasses, the practical hospitality of a person who prepares for the version of events where her friend needs feeding. I sat down at her kitchen table. She poured the wine. She put a plate in front of me. She sat across from me and waited. I ate some of the shrimp and grits, which were, as always, exactly what they were supposed to be. The kind of food that bypasses the analytical part of your brain entirely and speaks directly to whatever part of you is tired and needs something uncomplicated. I drank some of the wine, and then, without particularly intending to, I started to cry. Not the small, controlled 2-minute version I had allowed myself at the kitchen table with Beverly and the Sullivans' pound cake, the other kind. The kind that comes when you have been holding something at a precise distance for 3.5 weeks, maintaining the necessary professional distance between yourself and your own grief, because the grief could not be permitted to interfere with the work, and then the work is finished, and the distance collapses all at once. I cried for Patrick, a little. Not for who he was, but for who I had believed him to be for 19 years, for the version of him that had held doors open and laughed at my bad jokes and laid brick paths in the garden with his careful hands. That person had existed. I had not invented him entirely. He had simply also been someone else at the same time, running a parallel life on parallel tracks, and the person I had believed in had been real and not real simultaneously, which is its own particular variety of loss. I cried for Cassandra. Not for what she had done, but for what we had been 26 years, a dormitory 2 doors apart, a road trip to Savannah in July, her hand on mine in the fertility clinic waiting room. That friendship had been real. And it was gone now, as completely as if it had never existed, which is the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you it does. Not just end the relationship, it retroactively rewrites it, turns every memory into a question mark. And I cried, most of all, for the IVF we did not do, for the 3rd round with the modified protocol and the better odds, for the $18,500 that had existed all along, sitting in a Venmo account, moving in careful increments toward nursery furniture for someone else's child, for the bathtub where I had sat after the 2nd failure, doing the math, calculating the odds, deciding how much more I could afford to hope. For the yellow room I had painted and then repainted gray because looking at yellow without a child in it was, as I had once told Diane, like swallowing glass every morning. I did not become a mother. That is a sentence I have lived with for 8 years. I have made peace with it in the way that you make peace with things that do not actually offer peace by deciding that the life you have is the life you have and that grief is not a permanent address. But sitting at Diane's kitchen table on that Friday night, it was not a sentence I had made peace with. It was just a fact, sitting in the room with us, taking up more space than anything else. Diane did not say anything while I cried. She refilled my wine glass at some point. She pushed the plate of shrimp and grits closer to me, a small pragmatic gesture that said, "Eat, you need to eat. The body continues to require maintenance, even when everything else is in ruins." I ate some more. I cried some more. At some point, the 2 activities were happening simultaneously, which is undignified, but apparently not uncommon. Eventually, I stopped. Not because I felt better exactly, but because I had run out, the way a storm runs out, not resolved but exhausted, the energy that had been sustaining it finally spent. I sat back in the chair. I looked at the ceiling. I breathed. That, Diane said carefully, looked necessary. About 3 weeks overdue, I said. My voice came out rough, the texture of something that has been used hard. She nodded. She did not say, "I'm sorry," or "you're going to be fine," or any of the things people say to fill the space after crying. She simply sat with me in the quiet of her apartment, with the creaking floors and the lavender candles and the wine that was almost finished, and let the evening be what it was. After a while, she said, "Tell me how it went." The dinner. So I did. I told her about the folder and the documents and the $28,800 and the nursery furniture memo and Patrick's face going white and his 3 abandoned sentences and Cassandra's wet eyes and the separation agreement and Margaret says hi and the door closing. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You did it exactly right." I looked at her. "The paperwork screamed," she said. "You didn't have to." I thought about that, about standing in front of the mirror that morning and telling the woman looking back at me to let the paperwork do the screaming, about the 19 years of joint tax returns and the $47,000 and the $18,500 that had always been there, about the door closing without a slam. "Yeah," I said, "I think I did." At some point, after midnight, I stopped crying. And that, strangely, felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. 6 weeks after the dinner on Trad Street, I signed the final divorce settlement in Margaret's office on Meeting Street, above the coffee shop that still smelled like burnt espresso, in the chair I had sat in the first time I walked up those navy blue stairs with a folder of bank statements and a middle name that had been misspelled on a fraudulent loan application. Margaret set the documents in front of me. I read every page. This is a habit I have maintained for 22 years of professional life and was not going to abandon on the most consequential document I had signed since the mortgage in 2009. When I finished reading, I picked up the pen and signed my name. Louise, Louise, spelled correctly as it always has been when I am the one doing the writing. Margaret witnessed the signature. She picked up her copy of the agreement and set it in a folder with the same economy of motion she brought to everything, and she looked at me over her reading glasses. "You did well," she said, which from Margaret Holloway, a woman who considers unnecessary praise and inefficient use of language, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The settlement terms were, as she had predicted in our first meeting, favorable. The house on Trad Street would be sold, with a disproportionate share of the equity directed to me, accounting for my parents' $40,000 contribution, the dissipated marital assets, and the fraudulent HELOC. The Folly Beach condominium, the existence of which had genuinely surprised Gerald Fitch when Margaret introduced it into the proceedings, would also be liquidated, with the proceeds divided according to a formula that Margaret had negotiated with the particular quiet satisfaction of someone who had expected to win and had. The joint accounts, what remained of them, were divided. Patrick retained his business partnership interest, which was less valuable than he had hoped because Margaret had also introduced the undisclosed distributions into the record, and Gerald Fitch, to his credit, had advised his client to settle rather than litigate. It was, all things considered, the correct advice. I did not hate Patrick. This surprised me. I had expected to hate him in the comprehensive, sustaining way that feels appropriate when someone has done something genuinely terrible to you, the kind of hatred that keeps you warm on cold nights and gives you something to organize your feelings around. But somewhere between the dinner and the settlement, the hatred had burned through itself the way a fire burns through its fuel, and what was left was not warmth, but ash, and then not even ash. Just nothing. He became, over the course of 6 weeks, simply a man I used to know, a stranger with my former last name and a very sloppy approach to financial record-keeping. I kept Whitfield. It is my professional name. 22 years of signed documents and client relationships, and a reputation that I built one audit at a time. And I was not going to rebuild it under a different name because Patrick had turned out to be someone other than who I thought he was. The name was mine now, in a way it had not entirely been before. I found the apartment on Trad Street through a colleague whose landlord had a vacancy, a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a Charleston single 3 blocks from the house I was leaving, with a piazza that looked out over a garden that belonged to the building and that I was welcome to use but not responsible for maintaining, which seemed, at this particular point in my life. Like exactly the right arrangement. The ceilings were high. The floors were original heart pine, warm, and slightly uneven in the way of old things that have been lived in. The kitchen was smaller than the one I was leaving, and had a window over the sink that looked out into the garden and let in the morning light in a way that made it feel, on certain days, like being inside something that was glad you were there. I moved in on a Saturday in December with Diane's help, and a moving company that completed the job in 4 hours with a professionalism that I found deeply satisfying. I brought what was mine, I left what was not. The blue flower china I packed carefully and put in the back of the highest cabinet because they were a wedding gift from Patrick's aunt, and I had no particular attachment to them, but could not quite bring myself to leave them, which is a contradiction I have decided not to examine too closely. The filing cabinet came with me, obviously, the spice rack, alphabetized. The framed print from my office, "In God We Trust, All Others Must Provide Documentation," went on the wall above my new desk, where it has been every working day for 22 years and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. Beverly called every Sunday. She did not mention Patrick or Cassandra. She talked about her garden and the book club and a new restaurant that had opened on Main Street in Columbia that she thought I would like. The calls were exactly the length they needed to be and contained exactly the right amount of said and unsaid, which is its own kind of skill, and one I had not previously credited her with. Cassandra and I had not spoken since the dinner. I did not know and did not ask what her situation was, whether she and Patrick had continued, whether the baby had been born, whether the Midtown apartment was still being paid for by someone other than herself. That information existed somewhere in the world and was not mine to have. I had let it go the way you let go of a calculation that turns out to have no bearing on the answer you actually need. The promotion letter arrived on a Tuesday. Senior partner, Charleston office, effective the 1st of the month. Carol had left it on my desk with a sticky note that said, "Well deserved, long overdue." Carol is not a woman who writes sticky notes casually. I read the letter 3 times. Then I made myself a cup of coffee from the machine in the office kitchen that makes a sound like a small animal in mild distress but produces excellent coffee, and I sat at my new desk in my new office with the door that closes and the window that overlooks the parking lot, and I read it a 4th time. I opened my laptop. I created a new spreadsheet. I sat for a moment with my hands on the keyboard. I typed the name of the file, Renee New Start. I hit save. Then I got to work. 63 days after Patrick sat down at the kitchen table on Trad Street with shaking hands and said Cassandra's name in that careful, owned way that told me everything before he finished the sentence, I was sitting on the piazza of my apartment on the 2nd floor of a Charleston single 3 blocks away, eating a bowl of peaches from the farmer's market on Marion Square, listening to a mockingbird in the live oak by the garden gate lose its mind in the particular, joyful, completely unself-conscious way that mockingbirds do their best work. The coffee was still warm. The morning light was doing the thing it does in Charleston in December, when the air is finally cool and clear, coming in low and gold and slightly sideways, the kind of light that makes everything it touches look considered. Like the city had thought carefully about how it wanted to present itself this morning and had made good choices. Nobody had lied to me in 63 days. I want to say that simply, without elaboration, because it is the kind of statement that sounds small until you have lived through a period where it was not true, and then it becomes the most significant thing you can say about a morning. Nobody had lied to me. Every number in my life added up correctly. Every account balanced. Every signature on every document was mine, spelled correctly, signed by my own hand with my own full name. Louise, Loysa. I had been thinking, sitting on the piazza with the peaches and the coffee and the mockingbird, about what I would say if someone asked me what I had learned. Not the legal lessons, those are specific and transferable, and I have already mentally cataloged them for anyone who might need them, but the other ones, the ones that do not fit in a spreadsheet. The first thing I learned is that trust is not the same as evidence. I had trusted Patrick for 19 years, which I do not regret, because a life organized around the assumption that the people you love are deceiving you is not a life I want to live. But I had confused trusting him with not looking, and those are different things. Trust says, I believe you are honest. Not looking says, I have decided not to check. I had been doing the second while telling myself I was doing the first, and there is a cost to that confusion that I understand now in a way I did not before. The second thing I learned is that the most useful thing I own is not the filing cabinet, though the filing cabinet is extremely useful, and anyone who tells you otherwise has never needed documentation at a critical moment. The most useful thing I own is the habit of looking at numbers directly and asking them to tell me what they actually say rather than what I want them to say. I have had that habit for 22 years in my professional life. I should have applied it sooner in my personal one. I am applying it now. The third thing, and this one is harder to say, because it involves a grief that I have not finished with and am not sure I ever will be entirely, is that some losses do not resolve. They do not wrap up neatly into lessons or growth or the kind of transformation narrative that we tell ourselves about difficult periods because it makes them feel purposeful. The IVF, we did not do. The third round with the modified protocol and the better odds, and the $18,500 that existed all along, that is not something I have learned from. That is something I carry. And I have decided that carrying it is all right. That grief is not a problem to be solved. It is simply part of the shape of my life now, the way the repainted gray room on Trad Street was part of the shape of my life there present, known, walked around carefully, but not hidden. The mockingbird in the live oak was cycling through its repertoire, a dozen borrowed songs assembled into something entirely its own. I have always liked mockingbirds for this reason. There is something I find genuinely admirable about a creature that takes what it finds in the world and makes something new out of it. Something that is not the original thing but is not nothing either. Something that is, unmistakably, its own. I finished the peaches. I took the bowl inside. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked at the garden below. Not my garden, the building's garden, the one I was welcome to use and not responsible for, which still seemed like exactly the right arrangement. The jasmine along the back fence was bare this time of year. It would come back in spring. I went to my desk. I opened the laptop. I opened the file I had named Renee New Start, which at this point contains 17 tabs, all of them looking forward rather than back: the new budget, the new investment accounts, the senior partner compensation structure that Carol and I had finalized the previous week, the retirement projections that I had not revisited in 3 years and was now updating with the focused attention of a woman who has remembered that she is building something and would like to build it correctly. The filing cabinet in the corner was locked. Everything in it was organized, indexed, documented, and exactly where it was supposed to be. There was not a single number in my life that I did not understand. There was not a single account I could not access. There was not a single signature on any document that was not mine, spelled correctly, given freely, and meaning exactly what I intended it to mean. That is not a small thing. I know that now in a way I did not before. Here is my question for you, and I mean it genuinely, because I read every single comment, and they matter to me more than I know how to say. Would you have done it the same way? Would you have sat at that table and let the paperwork do the screaming? Or would you have done it differently, louder, sooner, with less composure and more noise? Because some days I think I was strong, and some days I think I was simply too tired to yell. And I am not entirely sure it matters which one is true, as long as I am here on this piazza with these peaches, in this apartment that is entirely mine, deciding what happens next. If this story reached you somewhere, if it sat with you in the way that certain stories do, the ones that find the part of you that needed to hear them, tell me in the comments where you are right now and what time it is there. I read every one, and I will see you in the next one. There is a particular kind of freedom that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fanfare or ceremony or the dramatic clarity of a moment you can point to afterward and say, that was when everything changed. It arrives the way the light arrives on a December morning in Charleston, quietly, incrementally, at an angle you were not quite expecting, until you look up from whatever you are doing and realize that the room is brighter than it was, and you cannot say precisely when that happened. That is the kind of freedom I found, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that settles into the ordinary moments of an ordinary day and makes them feel, for the first time in a long time, entirely your own. I think about Renee Whitfield sometimes, the version of her who sat at that kitchen table on a Thursday evening in late October and listened to her husband say her best friend's name in that soft, careful, owned way and felt the floor drop out from under her. The version who kept chewing, who set the fork down with the tines facing left, because apparently when your life detonates, some part of your brain decides that silverware placement is the remaining priority. Who picked up a pen and a notepad and wrote one word at the top of the first page. Audit. That word saved me, not in a grand cinematic way, in a practical, methodical, one column at a time way. Because the audit was not just about the money, though the money mattered enormously, and anyone who tells you otherwise has never had $47,000 redirected from their marriage without their knowledge. The audit was about looking, about refusing to let the comfort of trust become the habit of not looking, about understanding that the numbers in your life, all of them, not just the professional ones, deserve the same honest attention you would give a client's quarterly report. I did not set out to be strong. I want to be clear about that because I think there is a version of this story that gets told as a story about strength, about a woman who held it together and fought back and won. And while those things are not inaccurate, they are also not complete. There were 9 hours on a couch watching strangers make choux pastry. There was an entire container of ice cream consumed in 2 sittings. There were 11 days of low-grade nausea and a filing cabinet reorganized at midnight and a mirror I stood in front of and talked to because the alternative was talking to no one. Strength is not the absence of falling apart. Strength is Diane sitting on the floor next to the couch with takeout from Husk and saying, "Fall apart or get even, pick," and you reaching for the bag. Strength is Beverly driving down from Columbia with the good bakery pound cake because she knew she owed you something and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Strength is Margaret Holloway taking off her reading glasses and looking at you directly and saying, "I am going to enjoy this case." Strength is the people who show up and the decision to let them. I have thought often about the yellow room, the one I painted in 2012 for a child who never came, and repainted gray in 2017 because I could not keep swallowing glass every morning. The room exists now as a guest room in a house that is being prepared for sale, in a version of my life that is closing quietly behind me like a door at the end of a story. I do not know who will live in that house next. I do not know what they will do with the gray room. I hope they paint it something warm. What I know is that the room in my apartment on the 2nd floor of the Charleston Single, 3 blocks away, has windows that face east. In the mornings, the light comes in first thing, before anything else, before the coffee is made or the laptop is open or the day has organized itself into its proper shape. It comes in and it fills the room and it does not ask anything of me. It is simply light, doing what light does, indifferent to the history of the person it is falling on. I find that, most mornings, to be exactly enough. To anyone listening who is sitting in the before, in the part of the story where the floor has dropped out but you have not yet hit the ground, where you are still in that floating cartoon character off the cliff suspension, still waiting to understand what comes next, I want to say this. The ground is there. You will find it. And when you do, the first thing to do is not to run, or to fight, or to perform strength for anyone who is watching. The first thing to do is simply to stand on it, to feel it under your feet, to understand that it is solid and that it is yours. Then pick up a pen, open a new file, name it whatever you need to name it, and start from the first column. God has a way of making the path clear when we are ready to walk, it not always in the direction we expected, not always at the pace we would have chosen, but clear. I did not understand that on the Thursday evening when Patrick sat down at my kitchen table. I understand it now. On a December morning with peaches and coffee and a mockingbird in the live oak, I understand it in a way that does not require explanation. The filing cabinet is locked, the spreadsheet is balanced, and there is not a single number in my life that I do not understand. That is not a small thing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If this story found you at the right moment, if it sat with you the way certain stories do, the ones that arrive exactly when you needed them, share it with someone who might need it too. Leave me a comment and tell me where you are in the world right now, and what time it is there, and whether you would have done it the same way or differently. I read every single one, and I will see you in the next one.